Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray, and today is Popcast 69, and it's called Nature's Wisdom, Part 19. Tomorrow, I'm going to do Part 20, and we'll start talking about ways we can go forward based on our appreciation of how difficult it is to go forward. And I've made some notes and have some ideas about tomorrow's podcast already. But for today, let's finish with some more personal examples from my own life and experience, which was a little unusual. So some of these experiences may be somewhat different than other people had. Certainly the collection of them may be quite a bit different from what other people had. The point is that some of them are good illustrations of how we make it difficult to work on our social arrangement problems together because of our own individualities and strong points of view that conflict with other people's strong points of view. So hard to believe. I was a Sunday school teacher once I'm just trying to think. We moved to Bowie in 66. So in, 67 and 68, I was a Sunday school teacher. It may have extended into 69. I don't remember. I went to a little a church that when we first started going had no building of its own, so we had church in a movie theater, which was kind enough to allow us the use of the theater for this purpose. And eventually we were able to, build a building, and there was an old chapel up on the hill that had been there since slavery days, probably in the late 1700s, it seems to me, that, we used sometimes for Mass. And so, I was very active in the life of this parish. And at one point in 67 or 68, after a very wonderful Pope named John the 23rd encouraged the church to become more open to modern ideas. As he said, let's open the windows to the church, all the windows, and let some fresh air blow in. Parish councils were created, which Catholic churches had never had before, hadn't had in a century, and weren't very fond of, because they didn't want lay people to think they had too big a role in the church. They basically, the priestly group has all the power, and they want it to stay that way for reasons they think are good reasons. Power questions are always debatable, and there's usually some good points for both sides. I'm not dissing the Catholic Church. I just left it for my own reasons, which I'll talk about today. So I was, during these years in the second half of the 60s, still working in the courthouse. I lived in Bowie. I was active in this church. I actually got appointed to the parish council, and the pastor made me the vice chairman. And the chairman and I were good buddies, and of the same attitude. We were both liberal intellectuals, and we had high ambitions for, you know, opening the windows in the church. And the pastor was somewhat supportive, but he had to be careful because the bishop was very conservative. I would say reactionary is a fair word to describe the bishop at the time. And among the key issues of the day were, of course, social rights, civil rights, the Vietnam War, but also very strongly matters of birth control, which Catholics were forbidden to use any artificial means of birth control other than the rhythm method, which is largely ineffective, and also very much restricts the wonderful intimacy between husband and wife that our entire psychology screams for us to have and enjoy. Somehow Aristotle got it in his head that things have a purpose, and so any use of them different from their ultimate purpose is an abomination. It sounds like a creditable statement, but it turns out to be really unsupported by the continuing evidence of human existence. Unfortunately, the church was put together by Greek ideas and Jewish beliefs, and Greek ideas became very prominent in the church dogmatism, and that was one of them. So sex was always about babies, and there was still a good deal of disapproval of sex for its own sake, just joyous love between a man and a woman, physically enjoyed. So what does all this have to do with nature's wisdom? It does appear that nature's wisdom sometimes takes a while to show itself to us. And put it another way, it sometimes takes us quite a while to get past ideas of nature's wisdom that seems pretty foolish as time goes on, that seem contradicted by the evidence. But it takes us a long, slow time to process evidence and change ideas that run against the evidence. And of course, your new ideas may be wrong also. You fairly expect that some of that's going to happen. Later evidence will contradict what you thought was 100% right. So, it's a general idea. You don't get too much on your high horse for how clever you are. Experience will undo that a lot. And, humility is a pretty good thing, and it seems to be part of nature's wisdom, and it usually takes the form of slapping you in the face with unpleasant facts that you were pretty sure couldn't be the fact. This is all part of nature's wisdom conversation, but let's bring it around a little bit more to how difficult it is for us to face social arrangement problems together. Well, whether or not sex is to be confined to marriage is a social arrangement. Whether or not sex between young people in love who are not yet married is a good thing, is a matter of social arrangements. It's also a matter of people's religious ideas in some instances. It depends on your religion. But, and of course, not everybody has a religion. But so it's complicated because it's difficult for people who have a religion to deal with those who don't, and understandably so. Let's just do a quick recap. So we started with the idea that we want to change the world by changing ourselves, and that if you change yourself, you can actually have some little tiny effect on the world around you. And that the way you begin to change yourself is to go inside to your experience of awe and be refreshed in your hope which gives you energy, and also in your sense of oneness to what's inside you and to others. And the first thing we do is turn to each other for comfort and support. It's the very first thing. And what we would really like is, since it's a bit risky to trust our intuition that, we should live in fruitful relation to each other, we would like to see other people have the same intuition. And typically, because the intuition starts with the sense that there's some creative goodness at work in the world, we personify that into God, and we use one of the names of God for our personification. Well, quite understandably, it's very comforting when everybody around you is using the same name of God for their personification. And it's a bit unnerving when some deny that there's creative goodness in the heart of our psychology, because it seems plain as could be. And some of us say the creative goodness is not just in our psychology, but exists outside of it, and people deny that also. So far we got a lot of affirms and denies going on, and it's uncomfortable because all of your life you're going to live from these things. And you may not spend a lot of your life thinking about them and reconsidering them, but you're going to live from them. And it would be very comforting if everybody around you agreed. It doesn't prove you're right, but it sure gives you a hell of a lot of encouragement. I'm probably on the right path. Everybody seems to be on the same path. So understandably, it's hard for us to even talk about this aspect of the gift of each other, of our intuition that there's a creative goodness at the heart of the universe and in the heart of each of us, because it's so difficult to live by it when somebody doesn't agree. So we don't even like to talk about it with anybody that doesn't agree. And we feel, very easily threatened. Now, there's some of us who are far less threatened than others, but, there's a good deal of feeling threatened that's honestly present in each of us. And do you remember, again, I can't say it enough times, fear is normal, fear is natural. Roosevelt was wrong. We shouldn't fear fear. Jung had it better than Roosevelt. He said we have to accept fear. So we have to accept that people find it very fear-engendering that others don't agree with them about this fundamental intuition. Can we at least agree that it appears to be in our psychology, deep in our psychology, and that we live from it? Whether or not it's externally true, well, I am offering that. That's the basic thing I have to offer. For it's almost, I don't know how many hours that I've been talking, but if all you got out of it was that, then you got the most important part, the starting part. I would like us all to at least acknowledge that there seems to be ample evidence that there is in the heart of our psychology this very strong sense in intuition that there is creative goodness at work in the universe and in ourselves. And many of us choose to believe that it exists externally to our psychology and formed the world and formed our psychology. And many of us personify that externality, with one of the names of God. But you're not obliged to. The evidence isn't determinative that it does exist externally or not. It's anybody's guess. We'll all find out in due time. And it's also not at all clear that it should be personified or that this particular personification is the one that's right and all the others are wrong. So all of that disagreement, all of that upset, all of that fear engendering lack of comfort and support from those around you, we have to live with. But I think we could all agree, that's my point, the evidence seems to well support that there is in our psyche, deep in our psychology, this intuition about the world. And we live from that intuition. It's where we get our hope from, which is our energy to celebrate life, to live life, to use our gifts, to put our gifts to use as a way of living thanks. And it's also where we get our direction to turn towards each other. We need the comfort and support of each other. We don't have a choice. We can't survive without the comfort and support of each other. So this is the only way I know that we can go forward about this. But you can see that even just talking about it is scary. And there are those people who are more comfortable than others with talking about it, a different point of view than their own. But for a lot of people, it's honestly a real issue. And talking is normally how we begin to go ahead. So I have some alternative ideas tomorrow that I'll present tomorrow. But again, just the difficulty and the integrity of the difficulty and the integrity of the fear. It's not like, oh, there's something wrong with you, you're fearful. Or you should get rid of fear. Don't be afraid of fear. We're going to have fear. You can attempt to understand and appreciate that the best approach to fear is to accept it. But that just means that you're acknowledging, I'm afraid. It doesn't mean you're not afraid anymore. You're still afraid. You just realize that that's part of nature's wisdom. And that's my point. There are many among us who talk in terms of that's God's plan. I don't. I've made it plain from now that to me it's a lot more useful to talk about nature's wisdom, because I think we could all agree about nature's wisdom, but we can't ever all agree about God's plan. So I'm changing the conversation to one that works for all the people in the earth. We all have natural wisdom. And I think the evidence is growing that we have an interior psychology, which is the source of our hope, our energy to live, and our sense that there's a creative goodness at work in us and in the universe. And that leads us to turn to each other and go forward. This seems to be nature's wisdom in a nutshell. So that's why I speak about nature's wisdom instead of God's plan. So a couple of specifics. So I was the vice chairman of the parish council. One of the issues was birth control. I was also a young husband with, at that time, 3 kids and a mortgage, and a very modest job in the courthouse. Now, I'd finished law school in '67, but I didn't want to practice law. I felt it was too much about just making money. I wanted to count. I wanted to do something to carry out ideas about civil rights and social justice. So I spent 2 years after I finished law school, still staying in the courthouse, applying for every job I could find in the area, in the general category, of service, being part of the community of people that were working to try to make civil rights more of a reality in the Washington, D.C. area. And I applied for a number of jobs. And I was finally taken, and I didn't get any of them. I felt that I was reasonably qualified for some. Others I could see I was in over my head. One group took me aside and said, "You're obviously a man of good heart, and we want you to know that we're happy that you applied. We think you're an eminently qualified candidate. But this job pays a pretty good wage. And you're this well-educated, very intelligent son of a rich man. Your opportunities are everywhere. Whereas some nice young black guy can raise a family with this job. And we really think that that's what needs to happen. And I was honored because their speaking to me so frankly meant there was trust, that they trusted that my heart was in the right place. And I thought about it, and I thought, they're entirely right. And about the same time, the word got around in my family that I had been looking for a do-gooder job for a couple of years, and I was getting ready to think about something else. And so, my father showed up and at the courthouse, took me to lunch and said, I understand you might be willing to think about coming to work in the business world at this stage in your life. And I just want you to know that I'd love to have you come to work for me. So would your brother and your brother-in-law. They've very much asked me to come talk to you. I said, well, let me take the weekend to think about it. And I went home and talked to Gail, and I said, frankly, everything I have lived in the past, in the 60s, has been about a view of Christianity that is pretty purist. And my father owned a few slums, and he had employed a woman to collect rent, and she employed somebody who was very big and mean and intimidating. They never hurt anybody, but he was big and mean and intimidating, and he was hired on purpose. And my father only owned the slums for a brief period. His point was he bought them to tear them down and turn them into buildings as a part of the general growth of buildings in D.C. He was a real estate developer. He didn't do that much development. He was a person who bought pieces of real estate, put them together, and then sold them to somebody who wanted to build something on a big chunk of land. And that's how you got a big chunk of land put together. You had people like my father who went around buying individual parcels and put them together. But to me, it wasn't acceptable. Essentially, what he was doing wasn't moral. But at the same time, I wanted to support my family. It was time to leave the courthouse. I didn't want to practice law. So I thought, I'm entitled, to a reasonable living. And so I had also at the same time considered going to a graduate school in education. I already had a doctoral degree, and lawyers get doctoral degrees nowadays when they graduate. But in the world of education at the university level, even at the high school level, that wasn't adequate. So if I wanted to have a job as a university professor, I was going to have to go to graduate school and get a graduate degree in education. And so I considered that as a career that would be, a prospect, a possibility. And my wife said, well, here's the thing. Whatever choice you make, it's yours to make, and I'll support it 100%. You should do what you think is best for you. We can sell the house and use the money to live on and pay for the graduate school. We were personal friends with the head of CU's Department of Education at the time. And, through mutual friends, I was, pretty intelligent and well-spoken. And I could have easily gotten in. Um, and so she said, decide which way you want to go. You want to be a university professor or you want to be in the business world. You make the decision. The choice is yours. And just don't take the job with your father because you don't think you have any alternatives. So take it because you think that's what is best for you. And I did. I thought about it the weekend, and I decided I had a right to make a better living. And it was my integrity told me that I was going to stop going to church. That if I wasn't going to live Christianity, then I wasn't going to pretend to practice it. And so I took the job, and I never went back to church. Um, Other than weddings and funerals and christenings, etc. I never went back to church as a believer, and I didn't. As time went on, I didn't see any difference between how people live that go to church and how people live that don't go to church. Not an important difference. And so I eventually decided that I no longer believed in the divinity of Jesus. I don't deny that Jesus might be divine, but I just don't find in my heart the affirmation of that fact. Though I had lived in that belief my whole life up till this point in 69 and in the early 70s or so was when this change occurred in my attitude. Um, and so, that's enough for today. I still have more stories to tell. Um, I promise I'll wrap them up tomorrow as a part of talking about some beginning ideas for how we can go forward and put nature's wisdom, begin to try and apply it. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.